Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast. Your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hey Woo Crew, before we drop into today's very interesting episode, I just wanted to remind you that I have a new resource available for you. It's called Sacred Smoke, A Guide to Ethical Practice, and goes a little bit deeper into all the topics that we were chatting about or discussing last week on the show. Also a reminder that the Wise Wild Woman mentorship doors are open through the month of April, welcoming new beautiful souls in for the season of Beltane. If you would like to have a little more information about this program, if you're curious, you want to join us, either grab a time with me, the link will be below to set up a time to chat. No pressure ever in these calls. It's really just to connect and see if this is an aligned place for you to land. Or you can always just shoot me an email, eileen@myluminouslife.ca, or come find me over on Instagram at IamEileenMarch. All right, now for the episode. Hello, Woo Crew, and welcome back to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and I am here today with a super special guest, Kehla. Kehla is based in Victoria. She is a bold 6'2" Sacral Generator and a leading human design and gene keys business coach for entrepreneurs. She empowers business owners to elevate and expand by integrating their unique energetic blueprint into business strategies, ensuring every move aligns with their natural gifts. Known for her raw, edgy, and no bullshit approach, Kehla cuts through the noise of the online world, sparking real, courageous transformations. Her work bridges spirituality with practical business strategy, helping entrepreneurs create scalable, purpose-driven business rooted in fair exchange. You can catch her 2.5% top-ranked podcast, Living in Fierce Alignment, where she's released over 440 episodes and hosted more than 130 powerful interviews as well. Kehla, thank you so much for being here.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and thank you for having me on here with the Woo Crew. So good.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this too. We started recording this podcast a couple weeks ago and had cosmic internet errors, and so I'm delighted to kind of dive back in, and it's always interesting to see what threads get picked up at different times, and we're in a flowy space today, so I think this is going to be really good. So as I mentioned before we hopped on, I always start by asking my guests a little bit about their relationship with spirituality and the woo, because I was not woo for most of my life. I was an atheist until a few years ago. And so it's been really interesting for me to dig in to see where people are coming from, what their relationship is there, and how it informs the work that they do.
Yeah, I really love this question. And honestly, I think I've always been a spiritual being. Like, I did have a semi-religious upbringing with Catholicism, but I never fully dove into that. But then let's say we'd go to the bookstore and I would totally be drawn to the books of astrology and spirituality and witchcraft. Like, I was just so curious. And when I got older, I'd always be interested in like card readings or just any intuitive guidance. But I always thought that it was like something you were born with. Like, it wasn't something that you could cultivate within yourself. And so I spent a lot of time, literally until my probably late 20s, where I was just totally thought it was for other people. It wasn't for me. If I needed guidance, I'd have to go to others. And I didn't realize that this is really something that all of us can individually access. And so it's funny because I first got my feet in with personal development, and I did a personal development program like 10 years ago, and that completely changed my life. That's what got me into coaching. And I finished my degree as a teacher, and then I moved into personal training, and now I'm online, and I've been online with my business for the last 6 years. And so I would say in the last 6 years of being online, like that's where you have access to everything. That was my exposure to manifestation. Actually, I think the first time I read a manifestation book was The Secret back in like 2013.
Oh, wow.
And I've read I read the whole thing in like 3 hours. I was like, oh my God, I'm obsessed. So when I came into the online space, I had the mindset of manifestation, and then law of attraction started becoming a thing. And it was in 2021 when I discovered human design and gene keys. So at that point, I was identifying as a mindset coach. And then I became a spiritual mindset coach because of the certifications I'd gotten and, my relationship to spirituality at that point. But then I really became passionate about entrepreneurship. And that's when I pivoted into business coaching with human design and gene keys. And so it's funny because the spirituality came in naturally and organically over time in my life. And as I gained more experience as an entrepreneur, like I've been an entrepreneur, I've had 2 different businesses now over the last 9 years. And I just see the balance. Like you need that yin, feminine flow, spirituality, especially working with women. Like we're not interested in building businesses the same way that men do because we just operate differently. But then you also need that masculine structure and the strategy. And so I love bringing the two together with nuance to support female entrepreneurs of like, hey, you need a strategy, like you need to execute and have frameworks, but let's bring in the nuance of your human design and gene keys so that it actually feels good for you and it's scalable energetically. So that's kind of a long-winded story of how I got into spirituality, but then how it brought me to where I am now.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. It's always a long answer because it's a big question. So definitely. I love too that you kind of pointed out that piece I think is very familiar to a lot of us who came to spirituality or woo later in life, is that sense of like, oh, that's not for me, that's for other people, and I'll have to go elsewhere or outsource if I want that kind of access to that understanding or knowing, and how it really is available to all of us. So I love that you weave that into business too, because it is a space that I think there's so much potential for the feminine energetics to support us with those masculine frameworks. So I'm really curious because I know a lot about human design. Not an expert, but I definitely know quite a bit about it. My listeners know some about it. I've had a couple human design folks on, but I know pretty much nothing about the gene keys. And so I'm really excited to learn, what they are, how they help us, and how people can use them to support themselves in life, in business. The way that you teach about this, I know is going to be super enlightening. So I'm going to give you the floor. Share with us. Tell us about the gene keys.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'll dive into human design first because I feel like that's an easy segue into the gene keys because they are connected. So Richard Rudd is the founder of the gene keys, and actually he used to work with Ra, who is the founder of the human design system. And so when we look at your human design chart, you need your birth date, time, and location. And I use Genetic Matrix as a website, but you can also go to genekeys.com and get your free profile. There's tons of free resources there, but I'm just kind of telling you, if you're listening, you're like, oh, I'm going to bring up my chart while I listen to these gals. So human design, when you look at your human design chart, you're going to see the body graph, right? There's lots of different shapes. There's channels connecting the shapes. And then there's all these numbers inside of those centers, which are the shapes. So those numbers, there's numbers 1 to 64. And in human design, they're known as the gates of the channels that connect the centers. So those 64 gates come from the I Ching system, which is the Chinese divination text. So the I Ching system is the 64 streams of consciousness. And this is like ancient wisdom, obviously comes from Chinese culture and heritage. And the 64 gene keys, or the 64 hexagram, have 3 different frequencies each. So there's like numbers 1 to 64, and each number, each gene key, each hexagram, so everyone knows they're all the same thing. Yeah. They have a low, a mid, and a high frequency. So there's the shadow, the gift, and the city. So each of these gene keys is also connected to astrology. So if you look at your human design chart, you'll see on either side you have the 2 columns and there's little symbols there, and those are astrology. So you see the numbers that are activated in your chart inside of those columns. So the gene keys is a different system because what it's done is it's pulled 11 of those planets based on the same birth information that you use for human design into what we call the golden path, which is 3 different sequences of the gene keys. So inside of when you look up your chart, what you're going to see is like a bunch of little circles with lines connected to it and numbers inside of it. And we're going to screen share in a little bit so you can see that. But the gene keys are different than human design, even though they share similarities, because they're more of a contemplative approach. They're very feminine. So let's say you look at human design and it's like, oh, you're this type. This is your strategy. This is your authority. This is how you take action and how you move. The gene keys are more contemplative in the sense that each gene key is designed to be contemplated. And contemplated means it's like the space in between meditation and concentration. So we're going to dive into contemplation when we look up your chart in a minute. But you're meant to look at the different themes of the sequences and the spheres, which are the circles in the gene keys, and really look at how those energetic frequencies show up in your life and business.
Okay.
So it's a very non-binary approach. It's a very curious approach. You're meant to be inquiring. You're meant to be patient. You're meant to be gentle with yourself because it really is a self-reflection tool. And so it's just something that I love to bring into business. And I find that it's so helpful to contemplate your own gene keys when you notice the shadows coming up, rather than me just doing some generic mindset coaching to help you reframe a challenging situation. Like we get into like the nuance of your experience, and it just takes the experience of women in their business to like a whole other level of authenticity. So that's my explanation on the gene keys. Yeah.
That's so cool. Thank you so much. That's a really like simple explanation for a relatively kind of complex system in a lot of ways. And it's interesting because as you were speaking, like I keep seeing your posts about, you know, here's how I use AI without sounding like a robot, because I'm using my gene keys and my human design to inform and create. And so, yeah, there's so much possibility there to use the tools that we have, but not to end up in this like, this pushy masculine energy inside of our businesses. There's paths here. Anyways, my brain's sparking in a bunch of different directions, and I clearly am not terribly eloquent today, but yeah. Is this a good time for you to share and take us into the actual gene keys, what it looks like, and go into the more nitty gritties?
Yes. So we're going to be bringing up Eileen's chart here, and now you're going to see like what the gene keys look like, and you're going to see in the corner her human design chart. So on Genetic Matrix, what I love about using this platform is that it shows your human design and your gene keys. And obviously like I use these systems to complement one another. But let's say, so when you look up your gene keys, I'll just give the visible breakdown of like what each of the sequences are and like what people are looking at. So today we're going to be diving into more of the Pearl sequence, which is the blue sequence, but I'll do a quick summary of everything. So the 3 sequences, you see there's 3 different colors. The green sequence is known as the activation sequence. So this is like your conscious sun and earth and your unconscious sun and earth. So those are the planets, and each sphere is a different planet. So your activation sequence is what activates you in your life or in your business. And it's designed to show you how you're being activated so that you can create a core stability so that you can really shine your zones of genius through the work that you do. Your Venus sequence, which you can see, we go from the green into the red. The Venus sequence is all about relationships. It's all about experiencing and creating unconditional love with others. And so I love to dive into this sequence with clients to help them really connect deeper with their ideal clients. So you see typically in messaging, people are like, oh, just speak to the pain points and the desires. I'm like, hey, let's like bring some more depth to this and leverage this so that you can realize your own ways and how you're preventing that connection with your ideal client. But obviously you can use this for intimate relationships with your kids, with your partner, with friendships. So this is focused on relationships.
Right.
Then we move into the last sequence, which is the Pearl sequence. And this is known as the sequence of prosperity. And so what I love about the Pearl sequence is that some people, they hear this and they get hungry and they think, oh my God, this is going to tell me how to make more money. But what it really focuses on is actually how you're designed to be of service. So I love to dive into this sequence to really show people, because a lot of people that I connect with, they're entrepreneurs, obviously. And it's like, here's how you're designed to be of service. And we come to the sequence when you're in a launch, when you're selling, when you're creating your offers and getting super clear on how you're designed to make an impact, how you're designed to create that culture with the people that you're working with and serving, so that prosperity is not just the money hitting your bank account, but it's really about how you're connecting with others, how you're creating prosperity in relationships, in expanding your impact and really amplifying like how you're designed to impact others through your natural gifts. So that's a quick summary of all the sequences. I feel like a quick question people might have is like, oh my God, where do I even start today? Right? So here's the thing. Today we're getting into the Pearl sequence, but I want people to know that there's no right way to start. Like you can start at any sphere, any word, any line. There's no right way. But I do find that if you start in the activation sequence, it'll make sense, because you're going to realize, oh yes, when I create this core stability in myself and my understanding, like when you feel safe, you're more open to opening your heart, which is the Venus sequence. And then when you feel really great about your own stability and opening up your heart, it's easy to be of service because your cup is full. So I do recommend to start with the activation sequence, but ultimately there's literally no wrong way. But I just had like an inkling to share that.
Yeah, and
question.
as you share that too, it's looking at it, for those of you who are listening, please go ahead. I mean, you can watch it on Spotify, but it's going to be tiny. You can go over to YouTube to see a much bigger visual here, but there's also this sense of, the chakras, right? And if our root or our sacral doesn't feel good, doesn't feel stable, isn't filled up and anchored, everything else is off balance. So it's a similar kind of sense there as I look at this image. Like, yeah, it makes sense to start with the grounding in oneself so that we can do all the other work.
Totally. Okay. So would you like me to dive into your Pearl sequence? Because I know that today we are going to be talking about how to actualize your genius and like what that looks like being of service. So what I was thinking, obviously we have your chart up, so I can dive into like just talking about each of the spheres, talking about each of the lines and the shadow gifts and cities. And we can just look at like how that shows up for you and your business as an example for your audience to see like, oh, this is how you can contemplate it. Oh, this is how this might show up for me.
I love that idea.
Okay. I love it. So we're going to start, obviously we're looking at the Pearl sequence, the top 4 spheres inside of the golden path. And we're going to start here on the left with the vocation. So your vocation is the start of the Pearl sequence. And your vocation is really about your core wounding that happens when you're in the womb of your mother. So this is your deepest fear in alonement or being alone. And I literally just made up a word, alonement.
I love it.
Hopefully people got that.
Yeah, I heard. I was like,
where did that come from?
That's a great word. We're gonna carry that on.
So aloneness, and this really is going to show you how cultivating that inquiry into why this shows up in your relationships and why this shows up in how you connect with others is going to give you your greatest core talent and how you're designed to be of service to others. So I find it really interesting. You have the 54th gene key. So we have 54.1. We're not going to talk too much about the lines today, but we are going to talk about the shadow gift and cities. So when you're looking at your gene keys, the bottom of the 3 words, the shadow. So greed is a shadow, aspiration is a gift, and ascension is the highest expression known as the city. So when you're contemplating this, the way that you can look at it is realizing that actually, what's crazy is when sometimes I get intuitive hits because we've had a conversation on my podcast and like I know the nature of your work. I can see how this shows up. So when we're talking about having integrity around using things like smoke medicine or cultural things or finding rituals and routines and really honoring the source. I find that the shadow of greed, like you're really here to show people like the subconscious way and how they can be greedy with information or utilizing certain aspects of other cultures without really having an understanding of what it is, right? And typically, even if you look back into history, like greed is like taking things that aren't ours, like operating from this place of scarcity. key. So when we look at the gift of aspiration, it's like, okay, well, how can you use this to aspire and be inspired rather than take it as your own? Like the appreciation over cultural appropriation. And then when we look at ascension, it's like rising with the wisdom that we have, but then also realizing that, you know, it's all going to coexist. Like we're not here to take over anyone else's cultural experience or the wisdom that they have to share. Like we're here to rise with it and appreciate it. So that's how it came through for me, like knowing the work that you do and how I feel like that would show up and how you support your clients. That's not the only way that the 54th gene key can show up, but I'm really curious how that resonates with you.
Yeah, it lands in a big way, because that is a big piece of what I have grappled with on the journey to growing, you know, my own personal practice and my business and what I offer to others, is this walking this line of like, oh yeah, I would love to just simply take these ready-made rituals, traditions, knowledge, teachings, like I want them. And I recognizing that they're not all for me and finding the ones that are. Maybe I create them, maybe I, you know, do the extra work to trace my lineage back to find those practices that belong to me, at least enough that I can work with them and grow them into my own practice. Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. And it's so funny that right before we started, I said, I'm greedy for all of the knowledge that you're about to give me.
I know you said that, and then I hadn't realized that the shadow of greed was in your vocation, and I was like, oh my God, this is so perfect. But also just in that moment, it's like, obviously it's like there's the nuance, right? Like you're going to take the wisdom of the gene keys and you're going to realize, and it's going to accentuate and amplify like your wisdom to share with others, right? So it's obviously like you're sharing this episode. It's not like, ooh, this episode with Kehla, I'm not telling anyone. Like that would, I feel like that would be more greedy than like sharing it.
Share this,
right?
and I got a free reading from Kehla. No, no, we're not doing that here.
Oh my gosh, so good. Okay, so we're going to continue to dive into the rest of the Pearl sequence. And so as you'll see here, there's pathways, right? So every pathway throughout the golden path is like showing this transitional energy to the other spheres that are connected with that sphere. So for example, we have the pathway of initiative. So it's really interesting because we talk about this experience of where you've navigated greed or you've seen greed in others, and you're here to help them, you know, have that aspiration and ascend like beyond the current scarcity experience that they're happening. So that's like an initiation into realizing your culture sphere. So your culture sphere is all about how you connect with your fractal line, like the women that you're meant to connect with, like-minded souls, like those who are aligned with your purpose and, you know, the mission that you're on to create this change in the world. And so when we look at this gene key, like or this sphere, I should say, the culture sphere, also the way that I explain it to people, it's kind of like, let's say in a 9-to-5, you have the work culture. Like it's like a very specific ambience within the community that you are operating within or holding space for. So the 58th gene key, we have the shadow of dissatisfaction, vitality, and bliss. And so the way that because again, I know the nature of your work, the way that I see this showing up is this, we were talking about how with women, there's this feeling lost and feeling this dissatisfaction around where they belong, and really understanding, you know, how we've been indoctrinated into like specific seasons and times in the Gregorian calendar. And you talk about like the seasons of ritual on a daily basis or a seasonal basis throughout the year. And so the vitality component is like the way that you're guiding these women in these spaces with the work that you do is like supporting them in creating vitality in their life, realizing the importance of their nervous system regulation and really understanding what it means to be like educated and honoring the source and creating that vitality for themselves and for like the women around them, creating that sense of community. And ultimately, it's funny, I have like chills saying this to you right now, but also with the bliss, it's just when you are vital in your life, like in you're radiant in the work that you do and with the people that you're surrounded with, like there is this state of bliss, this state of satisfaction, right? So that's like the energy. Like if you ever notice, like let's say, you know, you're hosting a group experience or whatever it is that you're doing, or even for yourself in your own environment, and you're like, oh, this doesn't feel satisfying. Like I'm like dissatisfied right now. Like really asking yourself that question, like what would it look and feel like to bring vitality into this experience right now? And that's just like, that's the art of contemplation. It's like like this inquiry and curiosity of, oh, I noticed that I'm in this shadow in this specific moment. How can I shift this and take responsibility for my experience? So I'm curious how the 58th gene key lands for you in the culture sphere.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like I just got off as we were coming to record. I had just wrapped up the first week of my Unleash Your Inner Witch group program and came in just with this feeling of like bliss is a good word. So lit up, so excited, so like pinch me, I get to do this. Like how is this my life to be able to create these communities of women? I love that sense of like, yes, coming togetherness is part of the culture that I am creating and where I feel really, really aligned. And I love that question of, you know, what can I do to bring more vitality into this? Or maybe it's just something that needs to get left if it's no longer providing that or never was.
Yeah, so good. Okay, so now we're going to dive into the pathway of growth moving into your life's work. Now, on Genetic Matrix, we are looking at the Pearl sequence, the Pearl sequence. So it's also known as the brand sphere, but it says life works because it's connected to the activation sequence. So the pathway of growth is like, you know, you go from this inner wounding into this initiative into how you're going to hold space for your fractal line and how you connect with them. And through that creates the growth opportunity for your brand to evolve, like for your brand to come through. So you have 60.6 in your brand sphere. This is your conscious sun energy in astrology. So like we know, I mean, if you're into astrology, it's like a really big energy, like it's a main energy in terms of like what we experience and what we share in our life. Mm-hmm. So your brand in the gene keys and the part of the Pearl sequence is really about selling your truth. Like it's how you literally brand others with your message and how you support them and make an impact with them. It becomes like a really big part of your voice. So you have the 60th gene key in here, and we have the shadow of limitation, realism, and justice. And what I love is I feel like this is so aligned with the work that you do, is because it is constantly navigating like what are the limitations that we experience in terms of feeling disconnected from ourselves, feeling disconnected from our rhythm, feeling disconnected from our roots, our ancestors. And really that gift of realism is like being realistic about it. And then the justice piece, I feel like it's just the way that you talk about having the integrity with how you connect to certain aspects of different cultures or creating your own rituals. Like that work is very prevalent, like moving through the limitations and having this realistic perspective is very eye-opening. And then I haven't talked about the lines yet, but the 6th line of being a teacher makes total sense because I know that you have that natural essence of teaching, and it's about role modeling. So you've gone through your own journey. Yeah. And then now you're here and you're role modeling it and sharing it with others. I mean, obviously, you being a splenic projector, it's like you're here to optimize and to support people with their process and their journey. So that's a little tidbit on the brand sphere in your Pearl sequence. I'm just curious how that resonates with you.
Yeah, it lands again. I like looking at those words. I was like, "Oh, society is over by the culture piece." I'm like, and then the teacher bit. It's so funny. When I was a kid, my mom was always like, "You should be a teacher. You should be a teacher." And I was like, "I do not want to be a teacher. Don't want to teach kids. Don't want to have that schedule." But I love teaching. In my midwifery career, I loved having student midwives with me and being able to teach. And then that speaking to that point of limitation, realism, justice. I've always been very, very justice minded. You know, I'm openly, for everyone, for people. And especially in these turbulent times, it's just making me think I need to be a bit more vocal about some of the things I do stand for as part of the work that I do. And perhaps it's time to get a bit louder.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So good. See, that's the thing is when you contemplate the gene keys. So I'm obviously giving you a reading and understanding of what your gene keys are, like how the shadow gift and city show up in your work. But then it's through these realizations that we have that it really illuminates our natural way of being. Right? Like it is very woo-woo. But the thing is it's like such an organic way to just realize what it is that we're already doing and then doing more of that. Hence why this conversation is really about actualizing your genius, like bringing it more to light.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yes. Okay, so let's dive into the last pathways and also the last sphere. So first I'll talk about the pathway of service, which is connecting the vocation to the brand sphere. And it's not like the pathways go only one way. Like it's really like a breathing, right? Of the gene keys coming to life and being connected. So if you think about it from either direction, let's say you start at the vocation and you're going to connect with contemplating your brand, like really looking at, okay, the shadow of greed, aspiration, and ascension, like how can I take that to be of service through the work that I do with my brand and like my main mission through my business and through my essence of living on this planet. And then you can really look at, okay, my brand, how does my brand serve the way that I'm going to support people with my core talent and the vocation? So that's kind of like the push and pull experience of how those two connect. So then when we look at the pearl, we have the pathways of quantum that connect with the pearl. And what I love about the pathways of quantum, and like one of the really big things that I read when I was learning and studying initially about the gene keys is that, and I'm so glad Richard Rudd said this, and I thought it was so funny, is that you can't actually predict when a quantum leap will happen. It's something that happens in its own divine timing. And the fact is, because if you could predict when a quantum leap could happen, then you would be able to create them all the time. But the irony is that the pearl sphere is really about being grounded and present in your current reality with what it is that you currently have surrounding you, supporting you in your life and your business and your health, your wealth, like all the things that we consider prosperity beyond just money. So it's like when you're really rooted in the now and you're nurturing that now, like those are the baby steps, and that these quantum leaps in prosperity, they happen when they're meant to happen. And so I find that it really dissolves our ego when it comes to like, oh, prosperity and quantum leaps and this and the next level, and it's just very humbling, which is so great for our humanity.
Yeah.
So when we look at the 61 for you here, and we look at the shadow of psychosis, inspiration, and sanctity, what that means is psychosis is obviously in the mind, because actually, and I'll talk more about this afterwards, but the 61 is found in the head center in human design. So there's like this mental pressure. So if you look at how you create prosperity for yourself and how you really bring this to the table with the people that you work with, the women that you work with, psychosis is like this disconnection from reality, like things being fragmented, confusing, there just being a loss of direction, a loss of understanding. And so when we look at inspiration is when we can realize that this loss in another world, or just this uncertainty, like all of that chaotic energy, you can actually be inspired by that. It's like, well, if you're overwhelmed and unsure about how you're going to bring ritual into your life, or how you're going to connect to your ancestors, or like what this means and how this particular word might be offensive and now it's not, and now that it is, like there's a lot of overwhelming information. But when you look at how can I be inspired by this, like really realize that everything has its own course and it's designed to support me in this specific moment. That sanctity is like wholeness. So it's like, even though we may be having this mental pressure and understanding and being really unsure and feeling that chaotic energy, it's like, well, how can I be inspired by this and realize that this is all interconnected? This is all whole and complete the way that it is. And the answers are always available, and having that presence and connection with ourselves. So I feel like whenever I talk about the 61, it gets pretty like woo-woo and up there. And it's kind of a spiritual gene key in itself. But I'm curious if that's clicking for you, if you can relate to that in your own way.
Yeah, it does. Again, it's something that it's so interesting all how these synchronicities come in. But one of the women who's inside of my mentorship, my year-long mentorship, was saying how this space that's been created there really helps her engage without getting overwhelmed, because there is so much to know. There is so much shifting information. There is just like, we don't have an issue with information in our society. We have an issue with understanding and integration and not getting overwhelmed. And so to be able to create a space where that overwhelm is kept at bay, and there can still be learning and integration and like inspiration from each other, the women in there too. Like I feel like some of that inspiration, it's not just coming from me, it's coming from them too. But I love this, and I'm so curious, like it says line 6, nature. What does that nature refer to? Does that refer to my nature? Does it refer to nature?
Yeah, so nature is like a natural unfolding.
Okay.
Which I find really interesting because the work that you do, like connecting with nature and just the ancestral roots and looking at the different practices and rituals, like it's all a very natural experience and coming back to that. And it also, the sixth line always also holds the energy of a teacher, a role model, a visionary, like really someone who is looking at what's next, like the bigger picture experience of the situation. So having that sixth line there is like, you're really here to help people blow the doors off what it means to be inspired by the mental chaos that they might be experiencing, and how you really helping them realize like the wholeness and what's already present, and that, you know, there is nothing missing, like it is already whole and complete in the way that it is.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fascinating. All these wheels are turning in my head about, you know, not only how this is helpful in life, but obviously specifically with the work you do, how it's helpful for entrepreneurs. When I think about quantum, and so looking at, we're kind of in this pearl of the pearl sequence, you know, we think about these big leaps, this big growth, this immediate kind of gain or goal. And I'm wondering if there's some wisdom here too. You talked about how we can't predict quantum leaps. And so is there some wisdom with the pearl about how this is actually looking more about like long-term sustainable growth rather than just those kind of big immediate quantum gains?
Yeah. The thing is with the gene keys, when I share this with people, I share how it's a slow burn. When you get into the gene keys, if you come in here and you look at your golden path and you're like, oh, what does this word mean and this word, and you start diving into a dictionary and you're trying to figure it out, it's literally like a deer in headlights. Like they just stop, and it's almost like it gets really frustrating, and it's like, oh my god, I just want the answers, like I don't understand. And that's why with the gene keys, the art of contemplation, it's all about inquiry, having that patience and that gentleness, and contemplating and really looking at how does this show up for me. It's not something that you can rush,
right?
And so that's why I love using the gene keys, because it's like this just incessant, like non-stop contemplative approach to life and business, and realizing like a lot of the times I feel that I tell my clients to slow down and go deep rather than try to fly high and hit that quantum leap. And that was very poetic. That just like came out of my mouth, and woo, that was great. But that's the thing, is I love to help entrepreneurs bring this with them, like put this in their little toolkit as we navigate business, because I'm someone who I never scaled quickly, and like, yeah, that's a story that I tell myself, but also I can handle the turbulence and the grind and the way that things can take time, and I really love to help people with that in their business. And so it's like we're having one conversation, like we're having a conversation about the 54th, the 58th, the 61, and the 60 for you right now. But like we could have a conversation next week and it might show up differently. We could have a conversation about this in a year from now and it'll come across differently. And so that's the thing, is that, you know, they're called the gene keys, but also like if you want to, I'm not going to get into the weeds of this today, but they are connected to your DNA. Like they're connected to the amino acids. They are connected to the 64 like chromosomes. Like there's like some scientific connection to your gene keys and your DNA. And so it is going to be a very natural experience, and it's not something that you can rush. So long story short, kind of took that to an interesting angle there, but yes.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I also love, there's something else that a word you used to describe it earlier that I want to kind of just highlight again too, especially with that poetic, you know, slow down, go deep, use this as a tool, a support, a way of inquiry, and you called it, the relationship between them, a breathing. And I loved that sense of expansion, contraction, of lightness, and like the movement being so fluid. Yeah, it was just a really beautiful way to give a sense of what the energetics of this system can lend to people who are using it.
Totally. And the way that I like to bring human design into this as well is, like, let's say I mentioned earlier how the gene keys in human design, they share the I Ching system, the 64 gene keys. So these gates that you see inside of the centers of your human design chart, the ones that are colored in, there's 11 of those that become your gene keys. And so sometimes what I like to do is, like, let's say if I'm looking at a sequence, I will look and be like, well, where are these gates in your human design centers? So the interesting thing is, so if you look at the Pearl sequence specifically around how you're designed to be of service, so you can take it from a human design lens where the 54th the 58th, and the 60th are actually inside of your root center. So I'll just zoom in a little bit here so that people can see this. But your root center, right? So we have the 60th gate here, the 58th, and also the 54th. So then I look at, okay, so part of how you support the women that you work with is really in creating prosperity around alleviating pressure. The root center is all about like pressure, and it's all about deadlines and personal evolution. And so you're really here to help them with that. And then the interesting thing is your pearl is actually found in the head center in your human design chart, which is mental pressure. So it's just like you're all about alleviating pressure mentally and like physically in the body, in the timeline. And so that's another way that, I mean, they don't teach you this when you learn the gene keys from the gene keys, but I look at this from the lens of like human design gene keys. Like here's another way of looking at it.
Oh, and that feels so resonant. I mean, all I talk about is like rest, take the pressure off, give yourself more space and time and ease, and oh, that feels juicy. I'm all tingly.
Right?
Yeah. And is there anything else? Like, I know that the way that people can kind of dive into this if they want to get started or they want to get more information, I know you have a freebie to offer around the Pearl sequence, and obviously that link is going to be below. But is there any other, like, wrapping this wisdom up with a bow that you want to offer?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I want people to get is when you dive into the gene keys, that this is going to be a lifelong journey. So if you get into it and you're overwhelmed and you're thinking, oh my God, there's so much information, you just need to take one bite at a time. Like you could spend a whole month contemplating one sphere. And when you do that, it's really going to allow things to unfurl. You could take one sphere and just see where does this show up for me on a day-to-day basis in my conversations and how I think about myself, the action that I'm taking, and just get really curious. Like that art of contemplation that I talked about, I think it fits so well with the work that you do with women, like that inquiry, that being gentle with yourself, being patient and contemplating. That is the biggest thing. So obviously the freebie that I have for everyone, it's an ebook about your Pearl sequence, and it's pretty big. I'm not gonna lie, it's like 71 pages.
Oh my gosh.
But I know. But you're gonna get everything that you need, like all of the lines, the pathways, the spheres. Like I'm gonna dive into all of that so that if you're like, oh my God, I want to start somewhere, where do I start? You could, there you go, start with the Pearl sequence, because that ebook is free, and it's gonna take you on a journey similar to our conversation today, which is really exciting.
Right. What an amazing resource. And I suspect too, it's got all of the info in there. So one way to kind of cut the overwhelm is like, oh, but I don't need to learn it all, especially not at the beginning. You just have to look for your own numbers, right? Your own gates that are activated, and start there. Fun. I love knowledge. I love learning. I'm like, I want to be an expert in everything. And just like human design, just like even astrology, which I think of them all is kind of actually the simplest. It's just sampling it. I like that curiosity piece. Yeah. Allow your curiosity to dictate or lead you to what feels most juicy in the moment, right? Rather than trying to take it all in. It feels like a really lovely system that doesn't need to kind of, as you said, start at go and work your way to finish line. It's non-linear. So
yes,
which is perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your wisdom, your insights. Definitely, if you're curious, folks, about the gene keys, about human design, any of the work Kehla does, check out her podcast, because that is going to be a lovely way to take some of this information in really accessible, easy little chunks. Go get that freebie. Follow her over on Instagram. What's your handle? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah. Kehla G.
Oh,
it's literally at Kehla G. Yeah, my website, kehlag.com, and my channel is called Living in Fierce Alignment. So I have over, again, 400 and something, 50 episodes at this point, and they're all going to be great conversations. Lots of interviews, human design, gene keys, like applying everything to business. Like it's a really, really great place to hang out.
Totally bingeable. Yeah. Nice. Oh, well, that's wonderful. Thank you for being my guest, for being here with us. Thank you, Woo Crew, for listening. If you like this episode, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up, comment, subscribe on YouTube, rate and review over on Spotify and Apple and anywhere else you might be listening. And we will see you back here this time, or I will see you back here this time next week. Bye for now.